Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're continuing our journey through the MPP, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure. This whole series aims to make these complex rules a bit more accessible.
That's the plan.
Today we're tackling Chapter 2300. This one covers interference in derivation proceedings. Sounds pretty specialized.
It definitely is. Basically, this is the rule book for when two different inventors claim they came up with the same invention. It's about resolving those head-to-head conflicts right inside the USPTO.
So like an internal patent court case.
Sort of, yeah. They happen before the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, the PTT. Our mission today is really to unpack how the PTT figures out who gets the patent in these specific contested situations.
Okay, but there's a twist here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something about old rules and new rules because of the America Invents Act, the AIA.
Exactly. This chapter is almost like looking at two different legal eras at once. You have the old first-to-invent system and the newer first-inventor-to-file system. And the rules depend on when the application was filed.
All right, let's get into that. This sounds fundamental.
It really is. So for applications filed before March 16th, 2013, and remember, that includes applications claiming priority back before that date, we're mostly talking about interference proceedings.
Interference.
These are based on the old laws, like 35 U.S.C. 102G and 135. The whole point was to figure out who was truly the first person to invent the thing.
That classic U.S. system.
Yeah.
Lab notebooks, witness testimony, proving you conceived it first and worked diligently.
Precisely that. It focused entirely on the date of invention, not the filing date. A very complex, evidence-heavy process.
Which the AIA largely replaced, moving the U.S. closer to the rest of the world.
Correct. The AIA brought in the first inventor-to-file system for applications filed on or after March 16, 2013. Simpler in theory, focused on who got to the patent office first.
But the old interference rules didn't just disappear.
Nope. They still apply to those older cases or cases linked back to older filings. So practitioners, you might still need to know these pre-AIA rules very well. It creates this dual system we have to navigate.
Got it. So Chapter 2300 is still very relevant for potentially quite a few pending applications or disputes.
Absolutely. And the framework for these proceedings is laid out in the regulations, specifically 37 CFR Part 41 for interferences.
Part 41. And you mentioned the PT handles them.
Yes, the board does. But here's a little pork. The rules specifically say these Part 41 interferences are not technically considered trials.
Oh. Why the distinction?
It seems to reflect their unique administrative history. The newer proceedings under the AIA, handled under Part 42, are called trials. It's a subtle but important procedural point.
Okay, let's decode some jargon then. What actually triggers one of these interference fights? What does it mean for two claims to be in conflict?
The key term is interfering subject matter or interfering claims. The standard, found in rules like 37 CFR 41.201, is that an interference exists if the claims from two parties are patentably indistinct.
Patentably indistinct. Break that down for us.
It means the claims are essentially covering the same invention, legally speaking. If you took one party's claim and treated it as prior art, it would either anticipate the other party's claim, meaning it describes the same thing, or it would make it obvious.
And it has to work both ways. Claim A makes B obvious or anticipated, and Claim B does the same to A.
Exactly. It's about the scope of the claims. It's not necessarily about having the exact same words. You could have, say, one person claiming a chemical compound and another claiming a Marcouche group that includes that compound.
Right, or maybe slightly different descriptions of the same mechanical device. If they effectively cover the same inventive territory, they're indistinct.
Precisely. The goal is to avoid issuing two patents for what is fundamentally the same invention, but identical wording doesn't automatically mean interference either. The scope depends on the support in the rest of the application, the disclosure.
So the claims have to be legally equivalent in scope, regardless of the exact phrasing.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, how does this process even start? How does an examiner realize they have a potential interference on their hands?
Well, the MPP gives examiners guidance here. First, big rule. Generally, they need to finish examining the application for patentability on other grounds before suggesting an interference.
So make sure the claims are otherwise allowable before you start this big priority fight.
Exactly. Why waste everyone's time and the PT's resources if one set of claims is just unpatentable for some other reason, like lack of novelty or obviousness over other prior art?
Efficiency first. What else?
Examiners are strongly encouraged, really required, to consult an interference practice specialist, or IPS, early on.
An IPS, like an internal expert on these specific rules.
Yes. These proceedings are complex, kind of rare now compared to regular examination. The IPS helps ensure the examiner follows the right procedures, especially when things like restriction requirements interact with potential interferences. They provide consistency.
Okay, so involve the specialist. What about timing? Does the MPP say anything about delaying applications?
It stresses avoiding unnecessary delay. There's a specific point made. If an application has claims that don't interfere alongside claims that do, you shouldn't hold up the non-interfering ones.
So, if Claim 1 interferes, but Claim 2 is allowable and doesn't interfere with anyone, Claim 2 should proceed.
That's the idea. The manual gives an example. Applications C and D have interfering claims. C is fully examined and allowable. D is still being examined.
C gets issued. You don't wait for D.
Correct. Application C should issue promptly. The office doesn't want to suspend an otherwise allowable application just because another potentially interfering application is lagging behind. It pushes for resolution or issuance.
That keeps things moving. So once the examiner and the IPS think an interference is needed, how does it get formally started? Can the applicant kick it off?
Yes, an applicant can suggest an interference, for instance, against an issued patent they believe claims their invention but was filed later, under the old first-to-invent rules, remember? Or the examiner can initiate it between two pending applications.
What do they need to show?
They need to clearly identify the interfering claims, propose a count, which is like the formal description of the interfering subject matter, and provide evidence supporting their claimed priority. This might involve showing written description support in their own application, maybe translating foreign priority documents.
And they have to do this within certain time limits, right?
Right.
Especially against an issued patent.
Absolutely. Pre-AIA Section 135B had strict time bars. If you waited too long after a patent issued to suggest an interference, you could lose your chance entirely. It's very procedural.
Okay, so the interference gets declared. Who runs the show then?
Administrative patent judges, APJs at the PTA takeover, they manage the proceeding, set schedules, rule on motions, and ultimately issue a judgment on priority who invented first and potentially patentability of the claims involved.
And after the judgment, what happens to the application?
It goes back to the examiner for any remaining actions, like formally canceling claims that lost the priority contest. But the big consequence here is estoppel.
Estoppel. Sounds final.
It is. Issues that were raised or could have been raised and decided during the interference generally cannot be relitigated later before the examiner or in court. If you lost the fight on priority for a certain inventive concept, that decision sticks. It prevents endless back and forth.
A powerful tool for finality in that old system. Okay, that covers the pre-AIA interference world. But you said the AIA changed things for newer filings.
Right. For applications filed on or after March 16, 2013, the main mechanism isn't interference, it's the derivation proceeding.
Derivation. Sounds different.
It is fundamentally different. It's also governed by 35 U.S.C. 135, but subsections A and B as amended by the AIA. And these are considered trials under 37 CFR Part 42, handled by the PTT.
So not just an administrative contest, but a formal trial. What's the issue being tried? It's not first to invent anymore.
No, because we're in a first inventor to file world. Derivation is about misconduct. The petitioner is alleging that the inventor named in an earlier filed application didn't actually invent it themselves, but instead derived it, basically, stole it from the petitioner.
Whoa. So you're trying to prove copying or unauthorized use of your idea?
Exactly. You need to show the invention was communicated to the person who filed first, and that they filed without authorization, claiming your invention as their own. The focus shifts from invention dates to communication and improper conduct.
That's a completely different kind of evidence needed. Not lab notebooks, but maybe emails, meeting notes, proof of disclosure.
Precisely. It's about proving the origin of the idea in the earlier filed application wasn't legitimate. These are relatively rare compared to interferences historically, but they are the specific tool the AIA provides for this kind of inventorship dispute in the first-to-file system.
So, to recap, we've got the old, complex interference proceeding for pre-AIA cases, focused on proving who invented first through evidence like notebooks and diligence, still relevant for older filings. And then we have the newer derivation proceeding for post-AIA cases, which is a formal PTAB trial focused on proving someone improperly took the invention from the petitioner.
That's the essence of it. Two distinct systems under one chapter heading, really, addressing related but different problems based on the underlying law, first to invent versus first inventor to file.
What really stands out from all this is the sheer procedural weight. Consulting specialists, strict timing, avoiding delay, the finality of estoppel. It's intricate.
It absolutely is, and I think that complexity highlights a crucial point. Patent law isn't just about having a brilliant idea, it's also deeply about navigating a very specific, very detailed administrative and legal process. Whether it's proving you were first back in the day or proving someone derived your idea now, the system demands careful adherence to procedure. It's this constant balancing act between fairness to inventors and the efficient administration of the patent system.
A fascinating look at how the USPTO resolves inventorship conflicts, both past and present. It really underscores that procedural knowledge is just as critical as technical knowledge in patent practice.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, that wraps up our deep dive into MPP Chapter 2300. We would like to extend a special thank you to Mike Shepard, the creative director who organized this entire audio series.
And please remember, this summary of the MPEP was generated using AI tools, including ChatGPT and Notebook LM, and may contain errors or omissions. It is provided for general educational and informational purposes only, and is not legal advice or a substitute for formal instruction. For authoritative guidance, consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor, or a registered patent practitioner.